Sherlock Holmes is a cultural icon whom we consider to embody all things clever. To reference him is to make an allusion to logic and mystery. Time and time again, he has been reincarnated in literature and film alike. He is, without a doubt, the archetypical character of Detective Sleuth, bolstering a rich history of cultural relevance.
Okay, but the main point here is that Sherlock Holmes is old. We see him almost everywhere in our media, but most of us don't know much about him beyond the outfit, logic puzzles, and British accent. Something even the most snobbish of die-hard fans forget is that the Sherlock novels included a lot of human-animal relationships, which brings us to our sort of general thesis. When you examine the human-animal relationships in Sherlock Holmes, it shifts the foundation of his character. Now, to understand the shift, we have to understand the roots of Sherlock Holmes. He was created by Arthur Conan Doyle during the Victorian era, which serves as its own archetype for all things posh and English. Besides drinking tea and dying from cholera, Victorian England also had a fascination with oddities. They developed an oddity culture, which collected and curated anything from taxidermy pets to shrunken baby heads. Victorian oddity culture could be the subject of a full-on anthropological study, which, while probably infinitely interesting, is not the subject of this feature kucha. So, for our purposes, we can think of oddity culture as a sociological version of Freudian psychology. Freud wasn't English, and he only started his research at the tail end of the Victorian era. However, his theories developed the same way oddity culture did. That is, through obsessing over the unfamiliar unknown and turning into tabloid fodder. As long as we're borrowing the Freudian analogy, we should also consider what he thought about animals. One of his most famous studies, Wolfman, suggested that a man's nightmare about wolves was connected to his fear of being punished for incestuous thoughts. While oddity culture did include some avenues of incest, the thing we should focus on here is that animals were supposed to represent our subconscious. This Victorians read from the perspective of archetypical symbolism instead of mythological symbolism. The difference is that the mythological symbolism leads the reader to think of, say, an owl as a representation of wisdom. Meanwhile, archetypical symbolism leads the reader to think of that same owl as a drive to achieve wisdom. Psychology, while mostly pseudo, was becoming an intrinsic part of the reading process. Which makes a lot of sense when you think of the big picture behind the Victorian era. This is when the English were going through their Industrial Revolution, as well as launching multiple colonialist invasions. They wanted to make sense of society which devalued them as factory cogs, but also hailed them as a superior race, creating a double-edged sword in which Englishmen either died in the slums or condemned entire continents to the same fate.
So, to bring everything back together, Sherlock Holmes is not just a detective sleuth, but a reflection of England's psyche as it conquers its domestic land through industrialism and foreign lands through colonialism. This reflection is best captured in Sherlock Holmes' relationship with both domestic and foreign animals, hence the focus on human-animal relationships within the Sherlock Holmes canon.
Perhaps the most well-known human-animal relationship within the Sherlock Holmes canon is between Sherlock Holmes and Toby the dog. While often reincarnated as a bloodhound, Toby was actually a mutt. He first debuted in The Sign of Four, and he was described as an ugly, long-haired, loft-eared creature, half spaniel and half lurcher, brown and white in color, with a very clumsy, waddling gait. Toby helped Sherlock Holmes solve the mystery of the week by acting as a bloodhound. But this relationship between Sherlock Holmes and a domestic animal reveals both the superficial and dependency factor. Toby is judged as a mangy mutt despite being vitally important, similarly to how the English judge each other as proper and improper based off arbitrary measures of lineage and etiquette, despite the proper relying on the improper for their services.
As for foreign animals, Sherlock Holmes has a short relationship with a venomous snake. In the adventures of the Speckled Band, Sherlock Holmes eventually finds the cruel Dr. Grimsby Roylott, who was well known for abusing anyone and anything around him, planned to kill his nieces by dangling a speckled band over their bed. When he finally finds it, Sherlock Holmes cries, "It is Swamp Adder, the deadly snake in India."
Sherlock, of course, saves the day, sparing at least one Dr. Grimsby Roylott's nieces from his murder plot. While the Speckled Band had little agency of its own, unlike Toby, who was the prevailing hero of his tale, this reveals the colonist factor of this human-animal relationship. This animal, which was specified as Indian, was no more than a tool for Englishmen, similarly to how many non-English people were seen, especially those of color. Then there's the Hound of Baxtersville, which, of course, features the Hound of Baskerville, a hound described to be a great big beast with the same prowess of demons. According to Sherlock's latest client, the hound is part of a curse that has been plaguing his families for generations, ever since a distant relative had led a Moor woman to her death. Sherlock, of course, reveals that the hound, while real, is not the product of a curse. In reality, it was a pet that had been sicked on the supposedly cursed family, killing them from fright. This human-animal relationship further emphasizes the superficiality of England, as the hound was considered otherworldly for fitting outside the expectations of a typical dog, similarly to how many people within England were outcast as deviants of society for mild-mannered things. Flipping back to Dr. Grimsby Roylott in The Adventure of the Speckled Band, he also has a cheetah and baboon, which wander freely over his grounds and are feared by villagers almost as much as their master. While meant to act as security, they are mainly strange sights for Sherlock Holmes as he launches his investigation. While these human-animal relationships carry the same colorless factor as the one between Dr. Grimsby Roylott and his speckled band, since the cheetah and baboon are his tools, it also carries a secondary factor of isolation and exploitation. Dr. Grimsby Roylott not only removes these animals from their native lands, he also uses them as a form of spectacle, similarly to how most natives were ousted from their lands and then treated as New World wonders. There are many, many other examples from the Sherlock Holmes canon, although many of them go down a more metaphorical route, like the panhandler and the man with a twisted lip, who is repeatedly referred to as Bulldog to emphasize the weariness of his character, or Tonga in the Sinophore, a man from the Andaman Islands that is repeatedly referred to as a half-beast in increasingly racist ways, but the pattern has already been established. Sherlock Holmes will interact with both domestic and foreign animals in ways which reflect how the English interacted with its domestic and foreign lands. While the domestic animals carry the burdens of both a superficial and taxing society they are guaranteed a place in it, whereas all things foreign are a dangerous spectacle, either a threat to society or an accessory to it.
But this is where we wrap things up. When you examine the human-animal relationships in Sherlock Holmes, it shifts the foundation of his character. Sherlock Holmes becomes less your typical detective sleuth and more like a dialogue piece between the many facets that made up the Victorian era, mainly its conquering of its domestic lands through industrialism and its conquering of foreign lands through colonialism. One can only imagine what else modern-day readers might discover about Sherlock Holmes or other well-established characters when we look into the nit and grit of their stories.